place in Henley Street, down the High Street and Church Street, into the church itself. The mother was never present at the baptism. John Shakespeare and his newborn son would have been accompanied by the godparents, who were otherwise known as godsips or gossips. On this occasion the godfather was William Smith, a haberdasher and neighbour in Henley Street. The name of the infant was given before he was dipped in the font, and the sign of the cross marked upon his forehead. At the font, the gossips were exhorted to make sure that William Shakespeare heard sermons and learned the Creed, as well as the Lord's Prayer, in the English tongue. After the baptism, a piece of white linen cloth was placed on the head of the child, and remained there until the mother had been churched or purified. It was called the chrism cloth, and, if the infant died within a month, was used as a shroud. The ceremony of the Reformed Anglican faith in the time of Elizabeth still favoured the presentation of apostle spoons or christening shirts to the infant, given by the gossips, and the consumption of a christening cake in celebration. They were, after all, celebrating the saving of young William Shakespeare for eternity. Of his earthly life there was much less certainty. In the 16th century the mortality of the newly born was high. 9% died within a week of birth, and a further 11% before they were a month old. In the decade of Shakespeare's own birth, there were in Stratford 62.8 average annual baptisms and 42.8 average annual child burials. You had to be tough, or from a relatively prosperous family, to survive the odds. It is likely that Shakespeare had both of these advantages. Once the dangers of childhood had been surmounted, there was a further difficulty. The average lifespan of an adult male was 47 years. Since Shakespeare's parents were by this standard long-lived, he may have hoped to emulate their example, but he survived only 6 years beyond the average span. Something had wearied him. Since in London the average life expectancy was only 35 years in the more affluent parishes and 25 years in the poorer areas, it may have been the city that killed him. But this roll call of death had one necessary consequence. Half of the population were under the age of 20. It was a youthful culture, with all the vigour and ambition of early life. London itself was perpetually young. The first test of Shakespeare's own vigour came only 3 months after his birth. In the parish register of the 11th of July 1564, beside the record of the burial of a weaver's young apprentice from the High Street, was written, "Hic incipit pestis." Here begins the plague. In a period of 6 months, some 237 residents of Stratford died, more than 1/10 of its population. A family of 4 expired on the same side of Henley Street as the Shakespeares. But the Shakespeares survived. Perhaps the mother and her newborn son escaped to her old family home in the neighbouring hamlet of Wilmcote, and stayed there until the peril had passed. Only those who remained in the town succumbed to the infection. The parents, if not the child, suffered fear and trembling. They had already lost 2 daughters, both of whom had died in earliest infancy, and the care devoted to their firstborn son must have been close and intense. Such children tend to be confident and resilient in later life. They feel themselves to be in some sense blessed and protected from the hardships of the world. It is perhaps worth remarking that Shakespeare never contracted the plague that often raged through London, but we can also see the lineaments of that fortunate son in the character of the land from which he came. Chapter 2. She is my essence. Warwickshire was often described as primeval, and contours of ancient time can indeed be glimpsed in the lie of this territory and its now denuded hills. It has also been depicted as the heart or the navel of England, with the clear implication that Shakespeare himself embodies some central national worth. He is central to the centre, the core or source of Englishness itself. The countryside around Stratford was divided into 2 swathes. To the north lay the forest of Arden, the remains of the ancient forest that covered the Midlands. These tracts were known as the Wealden. The notion of the forest may suggest uninterrupted woodland, but that was not the case in the 16th century. The forest of Arden itself included sheep farms and farmsteads, meadows and pastures, wastes and intermittent woods. In this area the houses were not linked conveniently in lanes or streets, but in the words of an Elizabethan topographer, William Harrison, stand scattered abroad, each one dwelling in the midst of his own occupying. By the time Shakespeare wandered through Arden, the woods themselves were steadily being reduced by the demand for timber in building new houses. It required between 60 and 80 trees to erect a house. The forest was being stripped, too, for mining and subsistence farming. In his survey of the region for his Theatre of the Empire of Great Britain of 1611, John Speed noticed, "Great and notable destruction of wood." There never has been a sylvan paradise in England. It is always being destroyed. Yet the wood has always been a token of wildness and resistance. In As You Like It and A Midsummer Night's Dream, in Cymbeline and Titus Andronicus, it becomes a symbol of folklore and of ancient memory. The great prehistoric forest of the Arden gave refuge to the British tribes against the Roman invaders of their land. The name of Arden itself derives from Celtic roots, meaning high wooded valleys. It was the Celts who named the Ardennes in the region of northeastern France and Belgium. The same woods provided cover for the Celtic people from the marauding Saxon tribes of the Whickers. The legends of Guy of Warwick, imbibed by Shakespeare in his infancy, tell of the knight's hermitic concealment in the forest. His sword, used in his fight against the encroaching Danes, was kept as a memorial in Warwick Castle. So Arden was a place of concealment as well as of industry. It was an area that outlaws and vagrants might enter with impunity. That is why wood-dwellers were regarded with some disfavour by those from more open habitations. Wood-dwellers were people of lewd lives and conversation. They were as ignorant of God or any course of civil life as the very savages amongst the infidels. Thus the history of rebellion mingles with that of savagery and possible insurrection. The history runs very deep, and is inseparable from the land itself. When in As You Like It, Touchstone enters the wood, he declares that "I, now am I in Arden, the more fool I." Shakespeare's mother was Mary Arden. His future wife, Anne Hathaway, dwelled in the outskirts of the forest. His consciousness of the area was close and intense. Beyond the Wealden, in the south of the county, lay the Fielden. In Saxton's map of Warwickshire, issued in 1576, this region is almost wholly devoid of trees except for those growing in groves and small woods. The rest of the land had been changed to scrub and pasture, with the arable territory sweeping across the hills. In his Britannia, William Camden described it as "plain champaign country, and being rich in corn and green grass, yieldeth a right goodly and pleasant prospect." John Speed saw the view from the same spot as Camden, on the summit of Edge Hill, and noticed "the meadowing pastures, with their green mantles so embroidered with flowers." It is the quintessential picture of rural England. It was as much part of Shakespeare's vision as the forests beyond. It has been surmised that the Fielden was rich and Protestant, while the Wealden was poor and Catholic. This is the shorthand of popular prejudice, but it suggests a context for that balancing of oppositions that came so instinctively to Shakespeare. The climate of Stratford was of a mild temper, protected by the Welsh hills. There was much moisture in the land and in the air, as the various streams running through Stratford itself would have testified. The clouds from the southwest were known as Severn Jacks and presaged rain. Only "the tyrannous breathing of the north," as Imogen remarks in Cymbeline, "shakes all our buds from growing." But what, in the larger sense, has this landscape to do with Shakespeare, or Shakespeare with the landscape? Some future genius of topography may elucidate what has become known as the territorial imperative, the sense of place that binds and determines the nature of those who grow up on a certain spot of ground. Yet, in relation to Shakespeare, we may already venture one conclusion. The evidence of his work provides unequivocal proof that he was neither born nor raised in London. He does not have the harshness or magniloquence of John Milton, born in Bread Street.